Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to leave everything behind for a voice no one else can hear? Today, we begin the full story of Abraham, a man who said yes to God, even when it meant walking away from everything. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel as we dive into this powerful journey of faith, testing, and legacy. The desert winds whispered through Ur of the Chaldees, a land of idols, temples, and generations of comfort. And then, God spoke, not with thunder, not with fire, but with a quiet command that pierced Abraham's heart. Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. Genesis 12:1. He was 75, no map, no plan, just a promise. I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Genesis 12:2. So Abraham went. He packed up his life, left his father's gods behind, and stepped into the unknown. Because faith doesn't begin with answers, it begins with obedience. Have you ever stepped into your promise, only to find it wasn't what you expected? The journey was long, the desert endless, but Abraham obeyed. Each step through sand was a step through surrender. He walked not by sight, but by covenant, not knowing where, only with whom. When he reached the land of Canaan, the Lord appeared again. To your offspring I will give this land. Genesis 12:7. And Abraham built an altar. He didn't build a house. He didn't start construction. He worshiped right in the middle of the unknown, because he wasn't looking for land. He was looking for the one who gave the land. But then, the promise dried up. The sky grew hot. The ground cracked. And famine hit the land of promise. Wait, what? This was the place God said to go. This was the land God had shown him. But now it was barren, empty, dangerous. Sometimes, obedience doesn't look like abundance. Sometimes, God brings you to a dry place, not to punish you, but to prove what's inside you. Abraham left for Egypt, not out of rebellion, but survival. He had obeyed, and now he had to wait, between the promise and the provision. This is the test few talk about, the test of staying faithful, when the blessing hasn't shown up yet. God didn't abandon Abraham. He was still watching, still moving. Because famine isn't a contradiction to calling. It's a stage for future faith, prayer. God, when my promised land feels empty, teach me not to question your word, but to worship in the waiting. Remind me that hardship isn't proof you've left. It's proof you're still preparing. Give me the strength to hold the vision, even when the land feels dry. Have you ever been so afraid? You forgot the God who brought you this far? The land had grown dry, and Egypt, with its rivers and wealth, waited just beyond the desert. So Abraham left the promise for the provision. He wasn't rebelling, he was surviving. But survival can be dangerous when it silences trust. As they neared Egypt's gates, Abraham turned to his wife Sarai, the woman of beauty, the woman of destiny, and he said, "Say you are my sister, so that it may go well with me." Genesis 12:13. He wasn't lying completely. She was in part his sister, but make no mistake, this was fear. Fear that Pharaoh would kill him just to take her. So Abraham traded honesty for safety, and in that moment, the man of faith acted like a man of fear. Pharaoh saw Sarai, took her into his palace, and blessed Abraham with riches, livestock, and servants. Abraham had gained everything, but he was losing his promise, because deception might protect you in the short term, but it delays what God wants to do in you. But God stepped in. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai. Genesis 12:17. The king who never knew the covenant feared the God behind it. He summoned Abraham, rebuked him, and sent him away with everything. Abraham left Egypt humbled, but not rejected, because God doesn't abandon his people when they fail. He rescues them and teaches them how to walk again. You may mess up the journey, but if you return in surrender, God will still finish what he started. Have you ever wondered what to do after you've messed up, and God still lets you come back? Abraham walked away from Egypt, wealthier than when he came, but heavier in spirit than ever before. He had lied. He had trusted his own plan. He had failed. But God didn't cast him out. He brought him back. And so, step by step, Abraham returned to the land he once fled, back to Canaan, back to the dry hills, and back to the altar he had once built. And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, into the south. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. Genesis 13, 1-2. But riches didn't matter here, not gold, not camels, not reputation, only the altar. And he went on his journeys, even unto Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai. Genesis 13:3, unto the place of the altar, which he had made there at the first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Genesis 13:4. That's what real repentance looks like. Not just walking away from Egypt, but walking back to the altar. He didn't rebuild his tent first. He didn't build a monument to his success. He rebuilt worship. Because worship isn't just for victory, it's for recovery. Abraham didn't ask God for more. He simply returned to the fire, to the stones, to the smoke. And he called on the name of the Lord. The journey back to faith isn't paved with perfection. It's paved with surrender. Prayer. God, when we fail, bring us back to the altar, not to prove ourselves, but to remember who you are. Let worship rise from broken places, and let grace meet us where we last heard your voice. Have you ever been in a conflict where peace would cost you more than winning? The land was quiet again. Abraham had returned from Egypt wealthier than before, but something deeper had returned with him: wisdom. He pitched his tent. He called on God, and the fire of worship burned again. But not far from him, another tent was pitched. Lot. Lot had traveled with Abraham. He had grown rich, too, rich in flocks and herds and tents. And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. Genesis 13:5-6. And just like that, prosperity led to pressure. Their herdsmen began to quarrel, voices raised, space fought over, peace breaking apart. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. Genesis 13:7. Abraham could have demanded his rights. He was the elder, the leader, the man God called. But instead, he spoke gently. Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen. Genesis 13:8. For we be brethren. That line, we be brethren, not business partners, not competitors, family, and family was worth more than land. Is not the whole land before thee? Abraham said. Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. Genesis 13:9. He gave Lot the first choice. Abraham chose peace over position, because real power is the power to let go. Humility isn't weakness. It's the strength to walk away from a fight and still keep your soul. It looked like Eden. It reminded him of Egypt. But not all beauty is a blessing, and not every garden leads to life. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan. Genesis 13:11. He chose based on sight, not calling, not counsel, not prayer. He pitched his tent toward Sodom, a place filled with shadow. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. Genesis 13:13. He wasn't in the city yet, but his heart was leaning there. And the direction of your tent determines the direction of your life. Some choices don't look sinful until you're too far to turn back. Have you ever given something up, only for God to give you more than you imagined? Lot had gone, the land was divided, and Abraham stood alone again. But the moment Lot disappeared over the ridge, God spoke again. Because when people leave, heaven draws near. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, Lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. Genesis 13:14. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. Genesis 13:15. Lot saw green plains, but Abraham saw a kingdom. Lot got a city. Abraham received a nation. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth. Genesis 13:16. So that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. God was saying, you lost nothing by letting go. You gained everything by trusting me. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. Genesis 13:17. So Abraham walked, not with map, not with certainty, but with faith in every step. Then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. Genesis 13:18. He didn't build a tower. He didn't build walls. He built an altar, because the best response to promise is worship. If you want to walk in your inheritance, build your altar first. Prayer. Lord, when others take what looks better, teach us to lift our eyes. When you speak, we'll walk, even if the path is unfamiliar. Let every promise end with worship. Let every blessing begin with surrender. Have you ever been forced into a battle because someone you loved made the wrong choice? War came suddenly, not to Abraham's tent, not to the land of promise, but to the city where Lot had settled, Sodom. The kings of the east, 4 great powers, rose in alliance against the cities of the plain. And it came to pass that Amraphel king of Shinar, Arioch king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer king of Elam, and Tidal king of nations, Genesis 14:1, made war with Bera king of Sodom, Genesis 14:2. What began as political tension soon turned to conquest and chaos. Lot had chosen what looked easy. Now it would cost him everything. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Their cities were plundered, and Lot was taken. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. Genesis 14:12. He hadn't gone to war, but war had come for him. Then came the messenger, dust-covered, breathless. He entered Abraham's camp, told him of Lot, the capture, the kings, the impossible odds. And Abraham didn't hesitate. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. Genesis 14:14. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a soldier. He was a man of faith, who now stepped into war. By night he attacked, and he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them. Genesis 14:15. What kings could not do, a covenant man accomplished, with a handful of servants and the hand of God. He pursued them to Hobah, overran the enemy, and he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot, and his goods, and the women also, and the people. Genesis 14:16. Abraham won. Not for glory, not for riches, but for family. Because love will drive you to battle, and God will go with those who fight for the right reasons. Sometimes we become warriors, not because we want war, but because someone we love needs rescued. Prayer. Lord, when the ones we love fall into trouble, give us courage to go after them. When we face impossible odds, let your strength be enough. Teach us to fight for the right cause and to walk in victory that glorifies you. Have you ever had a moment so holy, it felt like heaven interrupted your victory? The battle was over, the captives rescued, the spoils reclaimed. Abraham returned victorious, not as a king, but as a covenant man who fought for the right reasons. And as he approached the valley of Shaveh, two kings came out to meet him. One, the king of Sodom, the other, a mystery. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine. Genesis 14:18. And he was the priest of the Most High God. He came without army, without demand, without origin or end, no lineage, no kingdom banner, just bread, wine, and blessing. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. Genesis 14:19. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand. Genesis 14:20. In the middle of blood and dust, heaven broke in, bread and wine, a table, in a battlefield, a picture of covenant yet to come. And Abraham gave him tithes of all. He didn't hesitate, didn't withhold. He honored what was holy. Then came the king of Sodom. Give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. Genesis 14:21. But Abraham refused. I have lift up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth. Genesis 14:22. That I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine. Genesis 14:23. Abraham didn't want his name tied to wicked kings. His reward was already spoken by God. Sometimes the blessing of man must be refused, so the blessing of God can remain untainted. Have you ever trusted God and still wondered, but when? The battles were over, the spoils rejected. The altar had been rebuilt. But Abraham was still waiting. He had followed the voice, left everything behind, fought wars for family, worshipped through famine. Yet one promise still remained untouched, a child. And then God came, not with fire, not with thunder, but with a vision, in the quiet of the night. After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield, and thy exceeding great reward. Genesis 15:1. But Abraham's heart ached, and Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless, and the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus? Genesis 15:2. Behold, to me thou hast given no seed. Genesis 15:3. It wasn't doubt, it was longing, the ache of a man who had believed but hadn't seen it yet. And God answered, not with rebuke, but with stars. And he brought him forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven, and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. Genesis 15:5. So shall thy seed be. Thousands, millions, nations to come from a barren man. And in that moment, Abraham didn't ask again. He believed. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. Genesis 15:6. Faith isn't the absence of questions. It's trusting through them until God speaks again. Prayer. Lord, when we wait, speak again. When the promise feels far, show us the stars. Remind us that you don't forget. Even when our hope grows tired, and let our faith be counted, even when our arms are still empty. Have you ever made a promise, but wondered if God would actually keep his? Abraham stood beneath the stars, still trying to wrap his heart around the promise. He had no son, but God had said it, and he believed it. And then God went deeper. And he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees to give thee this land to inherit it. Genesis 15:7. And Abraham asked, not out of doubt, but out of desire, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? Genesis 15:8. God answered, with a ceremony, not words, not thunder, but a covenant, sealed in sacrifice. And he said unto him, Take me an heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle-dove, and a young pigeon. Genesis 15:9. Abraham obeyed. He laid them out, split the bodies in halves, and waited. And when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Abram drove them away. Genesis 15:11. Hours passed. The sun lowered. The weight of glory fell. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, an horror of great darkness fell upon him. Genesis 15:12. This was not comfort. This was holy fear. Heaven was drawing near, and in that dark silence, God spoke. Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. Genesis 15:13. God revealed the pain before the promise. Captivity, bondage, slavery in Egypt. But in the 4th generation they shall come hither again. Genesis 15:16. Then came the moment, and it came to pass that, when the sun went down, and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. Genesis 15:17. God himself passed between the sacrifice. A flaming torch, a furnace of smoke. Abraham didn't walk through, only God did, because this covenant would not depend on man's faithfulness, but on God's. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram. Genesis 15:18. When God walks through the fire alone, he's saying, even if you fail, I won't. Have you ever gotten tired of waiting on God and tried to make the promise happen yourself? The stars still burned above Abraham's tent. The covenant still stood. The promise had been spoken, sealed, burned in fire. But time kept passing, and Sarai remained barren. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. Genesis 16:1. Waiting turned to worry, and worry became a plan. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. Genesis 16:2. And Abraham listened. He didn't pray. He didn't seek God. He listened and entered into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Genesis 16:4. What began as strategy became strife. Sarai blamed Abraham. Abraham gave her power, and Hagar was mistreated. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. Genesis 16:6. Hagar ran, pregnant, alone, into the wilderness, with nothing but pain, and a name she didn't ask for, but God saw her. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness. Genesis 16:7. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? Genesis 16:8. She didn't have an answer, only hurt. But God did not curse her. He comforted her. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. Genesis 16:9. Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. Genesis 16:11. She named him, Thou God seest me. Genesis 16:13. Because even when she was unseen by people, she was never invisible to God. When pain sends you running, grace will meet you in the wilderness. Prayer. Lord, when we grow tired of waiting, remind us that your promises are not delayed, only developing. When we plan in our flesh, have mercy. And when we run with pain, find us by the fountain, and remind us that you still see. Have you ever felt like too much time has passed for God to still use you? 13 years had passed. Ishmael was growing. Abraham was 99, and still no son from Sarai. The silence stretched long, until one day God spoke again. And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me, and be thou perfect. Genesis 17:1. And there, in the desert, God renewed what time had tried to bury. And I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. Genesis 17:2. And Abraham fell on his face, overwhelmed, humbled, awed. As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Genesis 17:4. Then the name changed. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. Genesis 17:5. God renamed his identity before he saw the fulfillment. And I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. Genesis 17:6. A promise that extended beyond his life and into kings, generations, and eternity. God then gave a sign. This is my covenant. Every man child among you shall be circumcised. Genesis 17:10. It wasn't just spiritual, it was physical. A mark, a reminder, a cutting away of the old. Sometimes God has to change your name before he changes your season. It was a normal day. The sun burned hot over the plains of Mamre. Abraham sat in the tent door, not praying, not planning, just resting. And then God came near. And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. Genesis 18:1. He lifted his eyes and saw them. 3 men, mysterious, silent, divine. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. Genesis 18:2. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself toward the ground. Abraham didn't hesitate. He didn't ask questions. He honored them instantly. Water was fetched, food was prepared. Sarai began baking, and Abraham stood by, ready to serve. And then one of them spoke. And they said unto him, Where is Sarah thy wife? And he said, Behold, in the tent. Genesis 18:9. Then came the word, the promise that seemed impossible. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life, and lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. Genesis 18:10. And Sarah laughed, not with joy, but with disbelief. She was 89, her womb long dead, hope long buried. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself. Genesis 18:12. But the Lord heard it. And the Lord said unto Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I of a surety bear a child which am old? Genesis 18:13. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Genesis 18:14. That question echoed in the heat of the day, and still echoes now. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Sarah tried to deny it. Then Sarah denied, saying, I laughed not, for she was afraid. And he said, Nay, but thou didst laugh. Genesis 18:15. But God wasn't angry, because faith doesn't always begin with belief. Sometimes it begins with broken laughter. What you laugh at today may be the very thing God brings to life tomorrow. Have you ever dared to stand before God and ask Him to spare someone who didn't deserve it? The meal was over. The Lord had spoken. Sarah had laughed, and the 3 visitors rose up and turned toward Sodom. And the men rose up from thence and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on the way. Genesis 18:16. What came next was holy, private, weighty. And the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do?" Genesis 18:17. God was about to judge Sodom, a city where sin had become normal, where Lot now lived, where fire would soon fall. And yet, God invited Abraham into the conversation. He revealed His plan, and Abraham stepped forward. "Wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked?" Genesis 18:23. Abraham didn't plead with emotion. He pled with justice. "Peradventure there be 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou also destroy and not spare the place?" Genesis 18:24. "Shall not the judge of all the earth do right?" Genesis 18:25. He wasn't arguing. He was interceding, not just for Lot, but for the whole city. "If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes." Genesis 18:26. And Abraham kept going. 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. Each time, the Lord said yes. Each time, mercy widened, but no one else joined the prayer. "I will not destroy it for 10's sake." Genesis 18:32. And the Lord left, and Abraham stood, alone again. Some fires fall because no one stood in the gap. The greatest power is not in the sword, but in the prayer of one who dares to plead for the guilty. Abraham wasn't saving perfect people. He was asking for time, for mercy, for another chance. And that's the kind of heart that moves heaven. Prayer. "Lord, give me a heart like Abraham, that intercedes for those who don't even pray for themselves. Teach me to weep for the wicked, to cry out for cities headed toward destruction. Let me stand in the gap until mercy falls instead of fire." Have you ever wondered how far God's mercy will go when someone's life is surrounded by fire? 2 angels arrived in Sodom, and there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. Genesis 19:1. Lot saw them and ran. He bowed. He insisted they stay in his house. He knew what happened when night fell in that city. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round. Genesis 19:4. The outcry of evil became real. Men demanded the visitors be handed over, to abuse, to defile, to destroy. Lot pleaded, Lot begged. He even offered his daughters, but the angels acted. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness. Genesis 19:11. Then came the warning. "For we will destroy this place because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord." Genesis 19:13. "Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city." Genesis 19:14. But his sons-in-law laughed. They thought it was a joke, and Lot hesitated. And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand. Genesis 19:16. God didn't wait for Lot's faith. He grabbed him by the hand, Lot, his wife, his daughters. The Lord being merciful unto him. Genesis 19:16. Mercy pulls you when your faith is frozen. Escape for thy life. Look not behind thee. Genesis 19:17. And as they ran, the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Genesis 19:24. The heavens opened, but not with rain, with fire, judgment, justice. The land shook, The sky burned, Sodom was no more, but one turned back. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Genesis 19:26. Because you can't walk into salvation while your heart still lives in destruction. And Abraham looked toward the city, and he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. Genesis 19:28. The fire fell, but Lot escaped, not because he was strong, not because he was ready, but because someone, Abraham, had prayed. And God remembered. Sometimes mercy is borrowed from someone else's faith, and the fire that should have consumed you becomes the very thing God pulls you from. Sodom was gone. Fire had fallen. Smoke still choked the valley. Lot had been pulled from the flames, but the damage was far from over. And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him. Genesis 19:30. Fear drove them upward. Isolation kept them hidden. Shame silenced their story. No home, no wife, no people, only memory and survival. The daughters looked at the future and saw nothing. And the firstborn said unto the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us. Genesis 19:31. So they made a plan, a desperate, dark plan. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him. Genesis 19:32. That night they did. And he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. Genesis 19:33. And the next night, again. Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father. Genesis 19:36. And from them came Moab and Ammon, nations that would rise in strife and war against Israel for generations. What started with fire ended with something deeper, something sadder. Because sometimes escaping judgment doesn't mean escaping pain. And Abraham, he was far away, safe, silent. The intercessor was now the observer. There are moments where we cannot stop what others choose, even when we once fought for their salvation. This scene is not about the fire, it's about what follows when God saves someone, and they don't know what to do with the mercy they've been given. Lot was rescued, but not restored. And without restoration, pain repeats itself. The greatest tragedy isn't judgment, it's surviving without healing. Prayer. Lord, help me not only escape, but be restored. Don't just pull me out, put me back together. And when others fall again after you've rescued them, give me the grace to pray, even when I can no longer intervene. Have you ever made the same mistake and wondered if God would still cover you? The cities were gone, the smoke had faded, and Abraham journeyed south. He came into the land of Gerar, a new place with new rulers, but an old fear. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, She is my sister, and Abimelech king of Gerar sent and took Sarah. Genesis 20:2. It was Egypt all over again. Fear returned, deception repeated. He had seen fire fall. He had spoken with God. Yet he still feared man more than the promise. But God stepped in. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, Behold, thou art but a dead man, for the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. Genesis 23. Abimelech hadn't touched her, and God saw that. Yea, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Genesis 26. Even when Abraham lied, God protected the truth, because the promise didn't depend on Abraham's perfection, but on God's preservation. Abimelech returned Sarah, rebuked Abraham, and honored him, and Abraham prayed. So Abraham prayed unto God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, and they bare children. Genesis 20:17. Because Abraham was still a prophet, even when he was flawed. God doesn't cancel your calling when you stumble. He covers your weakness and protects what he promised. This story isn't about Abraham's fear. It's about God's faithfulness. Even when you fail twice, God doesn't walk away. Time had passed, years, decades. Tears had been sown, laughter had faded, hope had nearly died. And then God remembered. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. Genesis 21:1. He had said it, and now he did it. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. Genesis 21:2. Not early, not late, at the set time. Abraham, 100 years old. Sarah, 90. And yet, in the tent where laughter once mocked the promise, now joy echoed like never before. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, Isaac. Genesis 21:3. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh so that all that hear will laugh with me. Genesis 21:6. She laughed again, but this time not in doubt, but in joy, because faith had fought through the silence, and God had the final word. God's promises are not buried by time. They are planted in it, and when he speaks, he brings it to pass. Sarah laughed in doubt, but God gave her a laugh that healed her soul. That's what happens when grace catches up with your waiting. Have you ever been cast out, even after doing everything right? The promise had come. Laughter had filled the tent, but not all hearts celebrated. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Genesis 21:9. Ishmael was older now, maybe 17, but Sarah still remembered the pain, still remembered the plan that went wrong. And now, the son of the bondwoman mocked the child of the promise. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son. Genesis 21:10. Harsh, final, unforgiving. For the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. Genesis 21:10. And the words tore Abraham's heart. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. Genesis 21:11. But God spoke, Let it not be grievous in thy sight, in all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice. Genesis 21:12. So early in the morning, Abraham gave bread and a bottle of water, and sent them away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Genesis 21:14. The sun rose, the water ran out, and Hagar broke. And she went and sat her down over against him a good way off, for she said, Let me not see the death of the child. Genesis 21:16. She wept. He cried, alone, again. But heaven heard. And God heard the voice of the lad. Genesis 21:17. And the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said, Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Genesis 21:17. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. Genesis 21:19. Mercy flowed again, right there in the dry place. God does not abandon the cast out. He does not overlook the overlooked. Hagar didn't ask for this story, but God still wrote her a future. The same God who met her at the spring years ago found her again when her strength was gone, because even when people walk away from you, God still walks toward you. Have you ever fought for peace, even when you had the power to win the fight? The past had been loud, fire, judgment, division, exile. But now came a quiet test. Abimelech, king of Gerar, came again. This time, not in confrontation, but with recognition. God is with thee in all that thou doest. Genesis 21:22. Even the nations could see Abraham carried the presence of the Almighty. Abimelech wanted peace. Now therefore swear unto me here by God that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's son. Genesis 21:23. Abraham agreed, but he had a matter to raise. And Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well of water, which Abimelech's servants had violently taken away. Genesis 21:25. It was a small thing, a well, but in the desert water is life, and peace means honesty. So they made a covenant. Sacrifices were made, witnesses were called, and the place was named. Wherefore he called that place Beersheba, because there they swear both of them. Genesis 21:31. Beersheba, the well of the oath. There, Abraham planted a grove, not just for shade, not just for roots, but for worship, and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. Genesis 21:33. Not the God of the moment, not just the God of miracles, but the God who endures forever. Peace isn't weakness. It's choosing what lasts longer than pride. In Beersheba, Abraham didn't just dig a well. He dug into eternity. And when the world saw power, he showed them peace. That's what people of covenant do. They make altars out of ordinary places. What if the thing God gave you, he asked you to give back? He had waited 25 years for Isaac. He had laughed. He had named him. He had watched him grow. Then came the test. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham. Genesis 22:1. Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. Genesis 22:2. No reason, no explanation, just a command. Abraham rose early, no delay, no argument, and he clave the wood for the burnt offering. Genesis 22:3. 3 days of walking, 3 days of silence, 3 days of looking at the sun, and wondering if he would come back down the mountain. Then, on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. Genesis 22:4. And he said the most powerful words faith can speak. I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. Genesis 22:5. Abraham laid the wood on Isaac. The son carried the sacrifice, just like a lamb would, centuries later. And Isaac spake and said, My father, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Genesis 22:7. And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb. Genesis 22:8. They came to the place, built the altar, laid the wood, bound the boy, and with trembling hand, he raised the knife. Faith doesn't always look like shouting on mountaintops. Sometimes it looks like walking up one, carrying the very thing you hope you won't have to give up. This was not about Isaac. This was about trust. Could Abraham give back the promise if God asked for it? Could you? Prayer. Lord, if you ask me to lay it down, give me the courage to obey, even when it breaks my heart, even when I don't understand. You are the God who gives, and I trust you, even if you take. Have you ever been right at the edge, and God stepped in just in time? The altar was built, the wood was set, Isaac was bound, the knife rose, and time seemed to freeze. But then, heaven shouted, and the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. Genesis 22:11. Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. Genesis 22:12. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. The knife dropped, the tears flowed, and then Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. Genesis 22:13. The lamb was waiting. The substitute was already there. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. Genesis 22:13. Abraham didn't just pass the test, he met the provider. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh, as it is said to this day, "In the mount of the Lord it shall be seen." Genesis 22:14. He didn't name it the place of the test. He named it the Lord will provide. Because the hardest moment of his life became the greatest revelation of God's heart. God will never ask from you what he is not prepared to provide himself. Abraham saw a ram, but generations later, God would send his own son and not stop the knife. This was the shadow. The cross would be the substance. And on this mountain, we learn that surrender births provision. Have you ever lost someone who carried your entire journey with them? She had followed him from Ur. She had laughed at God and then believed him. She had given birth in her old age. She had stood beside a man of covenant and become a woman of destiny. But now, her breath was gone. And Sarah was 107 and 20 years old. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Genesis 23:1. And Sarah died in Kirjatharba, and Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Genesis 23:2. The tent that once held laughter now echoed with silence. The woman Abraham loved was gone. And so the man who had talked with angels, who had walked through fire and mountains, now bowed low to grieve. But even in sorrow, Abraham moved with purpose. He approached the sons of Heth. He didn't demand, he requested, "I am a stranger and a sojourner with you. Give me a possession of a burying place with you." Genesis 23:4. He wanted a cave, a field, a place of honor, not just for Sarah, but for legacy. And after this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah. Genesis 23:19. Even in grief, Abraham thought generationally. The cave of Machpelah wouldn't just hold Sarah, it would hold Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, Leah. What he purchased in mourning became a monument of promise. Because covenant people don't just bury their dead, they plant them in faith, believing in what's still to come. What kind of legacy will your obedience leave long after you're gone? Abraham had lived 100 years after the promise. He had seen Isaac grow. He had buried Sarah in faith. He had walked with God through failures, through fire, through favor. And now, his time was drawing near. And Abraham was old and well-stricken in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. Genesis 24:1. Blessed, not because he was perfect, but because he believed. He took another wife, Keturah. Sons were born, lands were divided, but the promise remained with Isaac. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. Genesis 25:5. The others received gifts, but Isaac carried the covenant, because legacy is not just about wealth, it's about purpose. Then Abraham gave up the ghost and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Genesis 25:8. He died full, not just in days, but in destiny, and Isaac and Ishmael, the sons once divided, came together to bury their father. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah. Genesis 25:9. He was buried beside Sarah, beside the one who walked the journey, the mother of nations, the one who laughed. And thus, a chapter closed. Abraham's story didn't end with fire on Mount Moriah. It ended with peace under the trees of Machpelah. He wasn't remembered for the mistakes, but for the faith, for the courage to say yes, for following a voice that others couldn't hear, and leaving behind a legacy the world would never forget. Because when you walk with God, even your grave points forward. Final prayer. Lord, make my life count beyond my years. Let my days be full, not just with time, but with purpose. When I am gone, let others walk in the promises I carried. Let my obedience become their foundation, and may my legacy speak of you. Amen and amen.